She thought she was just the housekeeper's daughter. Quiet, invisible, ordinary. But the moment she touched the chessboard, a hidden talent awakened and a long-buried family secret began to unravel. What began as a simple game would soon change her life forever. A billionaire's unexpected offer, a hidden connection, and a talent no one saw coming would unravel a secret buried for nearly a decade. Why did Mr. Grayson stare at her like he knew her? And why did her mother go silent every time he came close? Stay with this story because what starts as a simple game will soon reveal a truth no one was ready to face. Don't touch anything and try not to speak unless spoken to. This isn't our world, Sophie. 9-year-old Sophie Davis nodded as she clutched her frayed backpack tighter to her chest. Her mother, Margaret, glanced nervously at the towering white columns of the Grayson estate, an opulent mansion perched above the green hills of Willow Creek, Maryland. The sun reflected off its massive windows like polished diamonds, and the air smelled of trimmed hedges and money. Today, Margaret wasn't just a housekeeper. She was also a mother who had no choice. Sophie's nanny had called in sick, and she couldn't leave her daughter home alone. So, she brought her along and prayed the girl would stay invisible. But Sophie Davis never stayed invisible for long. Inside the estate's grand marble foyer, Sophie's wide gray eyes caught sight of a glimmering chandelier, an icy waterfall suspended from a ceiling painted with gold-trim fresco. But what truly stopped her in her tracks wasn't the grandeur. It was a chessboard. It sat in the center of the Grayson Library, surrounded by bookshelves that soared toward the ceiling. The board was unlike anything she had ever seen. The pieces were carved from bone and ebony, so intricately detailed they seemed alive. A queen with a jeweled crown, a knight mid-leap. The black and white marble squares shimmered like obsidian under the soft light. "Sophie, sit by the window and do your homework," her mother whispered, pushing a notebook into her hands. "And don't go near that board." Sophie obeyed. At least her body did. Her eyes, however, kept drifting back to the board. Numbers blurred on the page. She remembered the day her teacher, Miss Carter, had explained how each piece moved. That was the only time math had made sense to her. Then a voice deep and warm startled her. "You like chess?" Sophie's pencil fell with a soft thud. She turned around to see a tall man in a navy suit. His silver hair neatly combed, his face kind but unreadable. His eyes, gray like hers, watched her with curiosity. I've never played," Sophie stammered. "Only seen it in school." "That's a shame," the man said, crouching to her level. "It's a beautiful game." Margaret appeared from behind a bookcase, panic in her eyes. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Grayson. She didn't mean." "She's not bothering me," Richard Grayson said, still looking at Sophie. "In fact, I could use the company. Would you like to learn?" Sophie hesitated, then looked at her mother. Margaret opened her mouth to protest, but the man's voice was firm. "I insist." And so began the first move. Sophie sat across from him, heart pounding, unsure if this was a test or a trap. But as Richard explained the basics, the pawn's first leap, the knight's peculiar leap, the silent power of the queen, Sophie absorbed it all like breath. She didn't just understand it. She saw it. She saw stories in the positions. The pawns weren't mere foot soldiers. They were guards, brave and patient. The rooks were towers from her favorite fantasy novels. Every piece had a role, and she could almost hear them whisper. "You see that?" Richard said as she moved her first piece. "That's intuition. Not everyone has that." They played a short game. Sophie lost, but not easily. At one point, She had cornered his king so deftly that even he leaned forward, eyes narrowed. "Would you like to come back tomorrow?" he asked. "Can I, Mama?" Margaret nodded hesitantly. "If Mr. Grayson doesn't mind, I'd be delighted," he said. But there was something else in his voice, something quiet, a flicker of recognition. That night, as they drove back to their small apartment, Sophie finally asked Mama, "Why is Mr. Grayson so nice to me?" Margaret gripped the steering wheel tighter. "He's just a kind man, baby. Don't think too much about it." But Sophie did think about it. She thought about it all night. The way he looked at her, the way she had felt the game, and most of all, the way her mother had gone silent, staring at an old box of photographs long after she thought Sophie was asleep. One photo slipped out just enough for Sophie to catch a glimpse. A younger version of her mother, standing beside a man with silver hair and warm gray eyes. The next day, Sophie returned to the Grayson estate. The chessboard was already set. Richard Grayson was waiting, a gentle smile playing at his lips. "You ready, Miss Davis?" he asked. "Yes, sir," she replied, adjusting her red knit cap. This time, Sophie played faster, smarter. She laid traps, sacrificed a pawn to take a rook, nearly claimed checkmate twice. Richard watched her in awe. "You think several steps ahead. How do you do that?" he asked. "I don't know," Sophie said honestly. "It's like the pieces talk to me, like they show me where they want to go." He paused. The warmth in his face turned briefly to something else. "Shock?" "Sorrow. Do you dream about chess sometimes?" "Last night the pieces danced, but by the rules, like a secret waltz." He laughed softly. "What else do you dream about?" "My dad," Sophie answered, surprising even herself. "He teaches me things in the dreams. He's kind. He has gray eyes and silver hair, a lot like yours." From behind a bookshelf, Margaret dropped the rag she was holding. Sophie turned, but her mother quickly bent down to pick it up. When she looked up, she avoided both their gazes. Richard Grayson stood abruptly. "Time to get back to your homework," he said, voice tight. As Sophie packed up her bag, she noticed him watching her. Not like a teacher watches a student, but like a man staring at a puzzle that suddenly made sense. And as the day ended, Sophie couldn't shake one question. Why did Mr. Grayson look at her like he'd known her forever? And more importantly, was he just a mentor or something far more personal? "I think I am." This time she lasted much longer. She claimed 3 of his pieces within 10 minutes. She spotted traps before they were sprung. Once she even put his king in check using a combination he later admitted most adults never noticed. Richard leaned back, eyes narrowed in a mix of curiosity and something else. Admiration. Or was it fear? "You're seeing the whole board before the rest of us even blink," he said softly. "How do you do that?" Sophie thought for a moment. "I think it's like I'm not playing against you. I'm playing with the board. It shows me patterns like little flashes before they happen." He stared at her stunned and whispered almost to himself. "Just like," Sophie tilted her head. "Just like who?" Before he could answer, he cleared his throat and smiled again. But this time it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Do you think about chess when you're not playing?" he asked. "Yeah. I imagine games in my head before bed. Sometimes I dream about them. The pieces move by themselves like they're alive." Richard froze, his hand halfway to a bishop. Then, almost without thinking, he asked, "Do you ever dream about someone teaching you?" "Yes," Sophie said. "It's always the same man. Kind, gentle, silver hair. He plays with me. He laughs. He tells me I'm brave." Margaret, who was dusting the shelves nearby, dropped her cloth again. This time, she didn't bother to pick it up. Do you know who he is? Richard asked quietly. Sophie hesitated. I think he's my dad. He closed his eyes for a beat, like the answer had hit him in the chest. But before anything more could be said, Margaret spoke from the corner, her voice sharp and tight. That's enough chess for today. Richard looked over at her. Margaret, I think we should talk about Sophie, about the future. We are not having this conversation, Mr. Grayson, she said quickly. She's a child. She's here to play chess. That's it. She's more than just a child. You know that, Margaret. But she was already gathering Sophie's things. In the van, silence pressed against the windows like fog. Sophie turned to her mother, her voice trembling. Why won't you let him talk to me about my dad? Why does he look at me like he knows something I don't? Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but she kept them fixed on the road. Because some truths aren't meant to be told too early. And because I'm afraid of what might happen if they are. At school the next day, Sophie couldn't concentrate at all. She doodled chessboards in the margins of her notebook. At recess, her friend Emma poked her side. You're acting like a total weirdo, Emma said. All you talk about is chess. It's just a game with horses and little castles. Sophie smiled but didn't respond because to her, chess wasn't just a game. It was the only place where everything made sense. That evening, when she returned to the Grayson estate, there was someone new waiting. A tall woman with sharp eyes and a soft smile. Sophia. I'm Dr. Sarah Lane. Your friend here says you're quite the player. She's the best, Richard said, standing beside her. Sophie blinked. You're a real coach. One of the best, Dr. Lane said. Mind if we play a game? Sophie nodded. Within minutes, she realized this wasn't like playing with Richard. Dr. Lane's moves were fast, precise, calculated. But Sophie wasn't rattled. She leaned in, felt the rhythm of the game and let the board speak. 10 moves and Dr. Lane frowned. 20 moves in, she whispered, interesting. By the 30th move, Sophie leaned forward and murmured, checkmate. Dr. Lane stared at the board in disbelief. You solved my puzzle. I just saw it, Sophie said. Dr. Lane turned to Richard, voice low but urgent. She's a phenom. I've never seen anything like it. You weren't exaggerating. She could be world champion. Margaret entered the room just in time to hear that. I'm sorry, she said, already shaking her head. That's not happening. She's just a little girl. But she's a genius, Dr. Lane argued gently. And geniuses deserve to shine. Richard took a breath. Margaret, we can't keep this from her much longer. Not the chess, not the truth. Margaret's hands trembled. She turned to Sophie, who looked back and forth between the adults, her heart pounding. What truth? But no one answered her. That night, in the quiet of their apartment, Sophie spotted the photo again. The one with her mom and the silver-haired man. She held it in her hands for a long time, then looked at her reflection in the window. Same eyes, same shape, same quiet storm behind them. She wasn't ready to say it out loud yet, but deep down she already knew. The morning of the tournament arrived with a strange heavy silence in the hotel suite. Sophie sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing her red knit cap, staring at the window where sunlight spilled over the Boston skyline. Her fingers tapped an invisible pattern on her knee. Bishop to e6, knight to f4, queen slides in for check. Margaret stood by the desk, her arms folded tight over her chest while Richard paced slowly near the mini-bar, not saying much. Then Margaret turned. Sophie, we need to talk, she said softly. Sophie looked up. Now? The tournament is in 2 hours. Can't wait. Her mother's voice was low, shaking slightly. Richard nodded in agreement, his usual calm replaced with something tense, almost fragile. Sophie sat down between them on the plush hotel couch, heart thudding. "Remember when you asked about your dad?" Margaret began. "And I told you not to think about it." Sophie nodded slowly. "You said some truths weren't meant to be told too early." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a worn photo, the one Sophie had seen before. In it, a younger version of her mother smiled beside a man with gray eyes and silver hair, the same eyes Sophie saw in the mirror every morning. "This is your father," Margaret said. Sophie took the photo with trembling hands. "Is this?" "Yes," Richard said, his voice barely more than a whisper. "It's me." Sophie's whole world seemed to go quiet. The pieces stopped moving in her mind. The imagined chessboard vanished. "You're my dad," she said, almost disbelieving. "But why didn't you tell me?" Richard's eyes glistened. "I wanted to every day, but I didn't know how. I didn't want to scare you or make you feel like I was trying to buy my way in." Margaret looked down. "When I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I left. I didn't want people thinking I was after his money. I wanted you to grow up normal, loved without expectations. But maybe I was wrong to keep it from you." Sophie stared at the photo again. "So that's why you hired Mom? To be near me?" Richard nodded, ashamed. "It was selfish. But the moment I saw you, I knew. Not just because of your eyes, because of how you looked at that chessboard like it was calling you." Sophie blinked hard, swallowing a lump in her throat. "You've been my dad this whole time, and I didn't know." "I'm so sorry," he said, voice cracking. She looked at him for a long moment, then at her mother, then back at him. "I'm not mad," she whispered, "just confused. But I still want to play today." Richard reached out, hesitating, then rested a hand gently on her shoulder. "And no matter what happens in that room, you make us proud just by being you." An hour later, the tournament hall was buzzing. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered. Kids in button-up shirts and serious expressions shuffled chess pieces during warm-ups. Sophie sat alone at her assigned board, hands in her lap, waiting. Her opponent arrived with swagger. 16-year-old Michael Torres, reigning youth champion from California, nodded at her like she was just another name to erase. "Didn't think they let little kids into the finals," he said with a smirk. Sophie didn't flinch. "I'm 9, not little." He laughed. "This won't take long." But from the first move Sophie played, like the board was a battlefield and every piece had a mission. Michael's aggression met a wall of quiet precision. She sacrificed a bishop to trap his rook. She saw a pattern unfolding 10 steps ahead. The clock ticked. The crowd grew. 2 hours in. Michael leaned back, frustration clouding his eyes. "How are you doing this?" Sophie didn't answer. She moved her queen with purpose. Check. He blocked it. She repositioned a knight. The tension climbed. Then, as the 3rd hour stretched on, she made the move that changed everything. Her queen sliced through a gap in his defense. She looked up, meeting his eyes. "Checkmate," she said. The room exploded with applause. Cameras flashed. Michael stared at the board, stunned, then offered his hand. "That was the best game I've ever played," he said. Sophie smiled shyly. "Thank you. You helped me play my best." An announcer took the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, at just 9 years old, Sophie Davis is the youngest champion in the history of this tournament." They handed her a gleaming trophy and a $10,000 check. She looked at it like it wasn't real. "Is this real money?" she whispered to Richard. He chuckled. "Very real. What can I do with it?" "What do you want to do?" Sophie thought for a moment. Buy chess sets for kids who don't have any so they can learn, too. The room went quiet. Then came a wave of applause, louder than the last. That night, back at the hotel restaurant, Sophie sat between her parents, her medal still hanging around her neck, her cheeks sore from smiling. Margaret looked at her like she was seeing her for the first time. Richard couldn't stop watching her, pride radiating from every part of him. "I can't believe I won," Sophie said, voice sleepy with joy. "You deserve everything that's coming," Richard replied, placing an arm around her. "But I still want to be me," she added quickly. "Not famous, not someone else, just Sophie Davis." Margaret smiled. "You'll always be our Sophie." 3 months later, nothing and everything had changed. Margaret and Sophie still lived in their modest apartment, but Richard visited almost daily. They played chess at the kitchen table. Sometimes all three of them played together, solving puzzles as a team. They called it family chess. Sophie started a chess club at school. Kids who'd never touched a board before began to learn. Local businesses donated sets because of her. Even big toy companies took notice. One day, a famous grandmaster from Russia flew in just to play with her. "You have a gift," he told her. "But more than that, you play with joy. That's rarer than talent." One snowy evening, as they sat by the fire, Sophie moved a knight across the board and looked up at her parents. "I love you," she said simply. "We love you, too," they replied in unison, pulling her into a warm embrace. And in that moment, surrounded by laughter, cocoa, and chess pieces that had once been just shapes on a board, Sophie Davis knew the truth. The real victory wasn't the trophy. It was learning how to make the first move and knowing her family would be there every step of the way. Did you feel what Sophie felt when she discovered the truth about her family? Do you think love, like chess, is sometimes about choosing your next move carefully? If this story moved you, type a 100 in the comments. Tell us what country you're watching from. And don't forget to share this story with someone who believes that even the smallest player can change the whole game. Sophie didn't just win a tournament. She found her identity, her voice, and the father she never knew she had. Sometimes the greatest victories aren't trophies. They're the truths we dare to face. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who believes in quiet strength and second chances.